Peterson Pipe Notes presents. Hi, I'm Mark Irwin. This is a presentation I gave at the Chicago Pipe Show on May 2nd, 2025, where we launched my new work, Peterson's Patent Pipes, the historic 1906 catalog, a digital restoration and commentary. In this presentation, I want to talk not about Kapp and Peterson's 1906 catalog per se, but rather on its impact on everything that's followed in its wake. I'll demonstrate that it contains the DNA of their mission, the fullest print record of Charles Peterson's achievement, and is the sacred writ which subsequent generations of the company's craftsmen and managers have consulted for their inspiration. As the catalog approaches its 120th anniversary, there's simply no better place to find out what the Peterson pipe is all about, whether you're new to the brand or have smoked one for the past 50 years. There's other great pipe catalogs with more pipes, more pages, more elegance in their production, produced by more prestigious makers, and yet none so indicative of the sustained trajectory of their company's journey. The great 1906 catalog, the beginning, we say, and with some justification. Yet in reality it was also the end of a development that began as far back as 1865, when the Kapp brothers George and Frederick arrived in London's Soho district from Bavaria to make and sell meerschaum pipes. They married English wives and soon set up separate businesses within walking distance of one another, George to make and Frederick to make and sell. Frederick went bankrupt, but rescued enough capital to move to Dublin in 1874 and set up as both tobacconist and carver. In 1875, he hired a journeyman wood turner born near Riga in present-day Latvia by the name of Charles Peterson. This 22-year-old would become tobacconist's manager within a few years and could be seen most any day carving meerschaums and briars at the window as he learned English from the customers. In 1881, Frederick Kapp died, but Charles Peterson carried on the business as Kapp brothers until Frederick's sons Christopher and Alfred came of age. In the meantime, George Kapp died and his widow Sarah became engaged to and then married Charles in 1887. For her part, Sarah Kapp Peterson would invest George's £1,500 in the patent work of Charles, resulting in the first patent systems in 1890. The pair were happily enough married that Captain, the honorific everyone used when addressing him, and so shall we, came more from Charles' union with Sarah, S. Kapp and C. Peterson, than his relation by marriage to Frederick's sons or eventual partnership with nephew Alfred. It was 1895 before the business had a factory of its own, a building you can still see today standing at 55 South King Street. It also had a new name, Kapp and Peterson. In 1903, a larger factory was needed and the company removed to 113 St. Stephen's Green, next door to Dublin Unitarian Church and at the corner of the Green. The service and employee entrance was on Cuff Lane at the back. With the new premises, K&P could stretch out their legs and expand. Tobacco blending was on the first floor, the main office on the fourth, with mezzanines wrapping around the upper stories, illuminated by the skylight that ran the length of the building, aiding production and finishing. You can see Alfred Kapp and Captain Peterson standing at the rail on the right at the lower front in this picture. It was from just here at the corner of St. Stephen's Green in 1905 that Peterson's most important catalog would take shape. Its impact on the company and the pipe smoking world might never have been made had the company not chosen to issue it as a large, durably bound book made to be carried by commercial travelers into K&P's markets as far afield as India, New South Wales, and Canada. Its sturdiness made it a mainstay on tobacconists' shop counters for decades, reflecting the hard-wearing nature of the pipes seen on its pages. The systems found there wouldn't change much in the coming decades, which kept the book from being thrown away and doubtless explains why copies of it are still occasionally found today. The number of shapes, mounts, stem configurations, and accessories were modest in comparison with the offerings of emerging briar competitors like Loeys, Barling, and Dunhill, but there was an essential difference in the mission behind them and thus in the pipes themselves. That difference has kept the company small, but so robust it has weathered sea changes that have foundered and sunk its original competitors. I want to explore the impact of that Peterson difference and how it has shaped the company with reference to 5 different tropes: evolution, apostolic succession, the collective unconscious, anamnesis, and mission. Some of them I'll use whimsically and some in earnest, but each reveals something about the impact of the catalog and the company's continuity and resilience. The first thing you'd expect to see is evolution, a response to the market dynamics and customer demand generated by K&P's commercial travelers, which included, incidentally, Alfred Kapp and Charles Peterson from time to time. And that's just what happened. The catalog expanded from 39 shapes in 1896 to 89 shapes a decade later. Surprisingly, the number of systems remained the same, 36. It was the non-system shapes that grew by an astonishing 1,700%. What happened? Did the lack of expansion in the system range mean it was commercially unsuccessful? Far from it. We know this for 3 reasons. First, K&P was forced to continue litigation against patent infringements until the patent covering the reservoir and graduated bore expired in 1910. Second, they continued to make patent applications as far afield as New Zealand and Australia. Third, after the 1890 system patent lapsed, the first system imitators hit the marketplace, including those by Adolf Frankow and Company's BBB Gloker-Well in 1912 and William Demuth Company's Wellington around 1915, all of which obliges us to recognize that the system performed as promised and was able to do so quite efficiently with 39 models. So why all the non-system shapes, I can hear you ask. With the success of their patent system, K&P was taking on the rest of the market by introducing a traditional shape range that drew on their own house style, but could also go toe-to-toe with similar shapes by other makers. K&P knew they had an advantage over other makers, the graduated bore P-lip stem, even though this was later sometimes forgotten or put aside. This amazing engineering feat, even working without a reservoir, yields a drier and less turbulent smoke than traditional stems. In fact, it's my belief as a longtime smoker of artisan pipes that only a well-crafted artisan stem can equal, but not surpass, what this stem can do. In the decades before artisan pipes, however, the stems of other makers were simply not capable of such heights. Even today, the inside of any pipe show smoking tent will show smokers with pipe cleaners stuck behind their ears or in their pockets, all waiting for that nasty moment when they suck tobacco juice up through the stem of their pipe. This never happens with a P-lip, whether on a straight or bent pipe. How could Peterson have forgotten? How could the rest of the smoking world never have caught on? Captain Peterson died in 1919. And 5 years later, K&P was producing non-system pipes with traditional round end, or what my friend Steve Laug at Reborn Pipes calls orific buttons, with straight bore smoke channels. These probably performed as well as other similarly made pipes. Among estate Petersons from this period, we see maybe one of these for every 50 P-lips. You can draw your own conclusion, but for my money, this is because it was the P-lips that performed and have been preserved. The company seemed to have understood the importance of their P-lip, however, as they soon dialed back production of orific stems. The pendulum began to swing the other way shortly after World War II, however, when entry-grade lines like the Donegal Rocky appeared. Most of Peterson's non-system pipes were still being made with P-lips, however, until the Dublin era, 1991 to 2018, when the P-lip was gradually abandoned on everything but the system and Sherlock Holmes lines. I haven't asked what the percentages are now, but while there are more P-lips now than in 2018, I suspect fishtails are still in the majority. The evolution of the shape catalog is fascinating to study, and I understand that someone has even devoted a blog to it. One way to get an overview of this development is to read all those posts, which isn't something I would myself relish, or lay your hands on the big Peterson book, which breaks things down into eras, allowing us to see the company respond to changes in fashion and taste. For now, we can do an overgeneralization using the Pete book's division of the company's history after the patent era. In the Irish Free State era, we see a continuation of the patent system line, but a shift toward smaller shapes like the bull cap and faceted panels, as well as the brief flirtation with horrific stems on some of the classic range shapes. The Ire era, which stretches across the Great Depression and World War II, was one of extremes, beginning with K&P's big expansion in the U.S. market through its partner, Rogers Imports Limited, whose importance can't be overemphasized. The Shamrock nickel mount line, as well as extensive named and tiered lines, including the Deluxe, Sterling, Kapp, Captain Peterson, and Killarney, all appeared before the U-boat blockade of World War II brought production almost to a standstill. This era also marked the shift toward unmounted pipes in the classic range. The early Republic era resumed what had begun before World War II, expanding and consolidating manufacture of pipes by named lines according to bowl grade and mount, and was facilitated by Rogers Imports Limited. This was an era of great expansion for Kapp and Peterson. Classic range pipes maintained their P-lip patent-style graduated bore stems, often with one or another type of aluminum inner tube or stinger. There was a robust shape chart, still led by the system in 3 grades. Rustication reached a high level of perfection. Sandblasting became more common. Specialty lines directed to women, those with dentures, and those looking for something a little different, like the churchwarden or military mount, were launched. It was also during this era that nickel mount marks and the gratis pipe tool, both present since the earliest days of the company, were discarded. The late Republic is to me the most remarkable period in K&P's history after the patent era. Needing to expand and upgrade the factory, it was moved to the suburb of Sallynoggett in 1972. After a hiatus of 30 years, the hallmarking of sterling and gold mount pipes was resumed. The era expanded the manufacture of meerschaum pipes, and K&P began its first real experiments outside classic house style with the freestyle mirrors and the plateau Plato. It witnessed a huge celebration of the company's centenary in 1975, which included an Irish public TV documentary, an unprecedented 4 new system shapes, the reintroduction of spigot mounts unseen since the patent era, an unmounted system line, and its first patent era commemorative releases in the hallmark silver cap and chain and the Mark Twain. This was the pinnacle of Kapp and Peterson's achievement since the patent era, much of it due to its renewed appreciation of its history and close attention to the 1906 catalog. Yet the late Republic era also saw K&P transition from being a family business, struggle through the world pipocalypse in 1985, in which it lost 2/3 of its workforce and its entire bowl turning facility, and go through tumultuous changes in ownership and management. The Dublin era was another remarkable period in the company's history. Its new owner and CEO, Tom Palmer, was immensely proud of the company's history and employed his considerable skills as entrepreneur to bring the company to the forefront of the 1990s consumer-driven zeitgeist. He reintroduced pipe tobacco after an absence of 20 years and cigars into the company's portfolio for the first time since the patent era. The system was moved to the back of the bus and yet maintained, while the classic range dominated with an ever-increasing and perennially changing number of lines and finishes. Crucially, the Dublin era introduced what are now standard annual collectibles, including the Pipe of the Year, the St. Patrick's Day, the Christmas, and the Halloween pipe. During this time, Peterson released a number of high-end themed limited edition collections, like the Great Explorers, Antique, Riders, Rivers, and others. In doing so, K&P's most remarkable range of shapes, the bees, or killer bees as I call them, grew to a staggering 65 in number, plus a few odds and ends, all of them springing from the Pipe of the Year or limited edition collections, and then filtering down through mid-range commemoratives and lines, making these unique shapes accessible to almost any pipeman. It also witnessed the first serious decline in engineering, occasioned by a lack of understanding and attention to airflow and classic range and army mount pipes, the degradation of P-lip shaping, the near death of vulcanite stems in favor of non-oxidizing acrylic, and the worldwide end of paper marketing ephemera, meaning that from 2010 on, it would be increasingly difficult for the pipe community to preserve the history of the company. The Laudisi era, which commenced in 2018, has brought significant advances in finishing and the recovery of engineering. New finishes like the Eora, Rua, and Barley, in combination with in-house artisan-level sandblasting, have made us forget the loss of beautiful grain, once seen even on entry and mid-grade lines. The company is again strengthening its heritage foundations, expanding to a new factory in Dean's Grange, restoring in-house bowl turning, and making continual refinements in engineering. The Supreme grade has been restored, and classic shapes like the Patent Shape 4, the IR Square Panel 444, the IFS 411 and 3085 have been issued, not to mention annual POYs of patent reproductions like the X160, the 4AB, and Mark Twain's 14AB. Let's turn to a second way of understanding the impact of the 1906 catalog by imagining three things. First, the catalog as shop manual or holy writ. Second and third, the Apostle and Nellie representing gifted implementation and workday execution. All three are necessary to move Peterson's Zen tricycle. As many Peak Geeks know, Kapp and Peterson historically relied on what can be dismissed as no more than a sit with Nellie apprenticeship, sitting with Nellie being a disparaging term used to describe poor quality training learned mostly by observation. It's always been more, of course, and when a spark passes from teacher to disciple, it can flare up into something far more than workday execution, becoming a type of apostolic succession, borrowing that term from Christianity, where it means that authority and understanding are passed from teacher to disciple down through the generations to ensure an unbroken transmission of core values and knowledge. I asked Josh Burgess, who spent 7 years as Peterson's managing director, about the Nellie and Apostle process as it works in the factory. The starting point, he told me, is the visionary creation of Charles Peterson, embodied in the 1906 catalog. The Apostle of implementation and Nellie of execution is how that vision is implemented at the Dean's Grange factory. A new hire, Josh says, has a certain amount of documented information available through software, processes, correct procedures, even formulas for correct stain color. But there comes a point at which information can't be transmitted this way. How does Maria learn to be a good stainer? She sits with Jimmy, seen here in 1960. In 2025, how would I learn to buff a pipe? I'd sit with Kieran Horan. How would I learn to be a good paperer? I would sit with Austin Quinlan. It's what luthiers call embodied knowledge, where understanding and skill are developed through physical interaction and experience rather than abstract thought or learning. Josh says it's both software and a human trainer. Software is the consensus, but it's no substitute for physicality. Formation, via a text like the 1906 catalog or our training software, is about how to think. Training, learning to play a musical instrument, touch, type, rusticate a Peterson pipe, is about skill, which is transmitted by the senses. It's what feels right, looks right, and so on. And this is the craft of making pipes at Dean's Grange, the necessary workday execution. There also appear in the factory those, as Josh says, who move the boundaries while still working within the system. We see these men as factory managers at one time or another. Men like Tony Whelan Jr., Joe Kinney, Jonathan Fields, Patty Larrigan, Giacomo Pinzo, and Austin Quinlan, men who are working within the set of design principles set down by Charles Peterson, but still depend on some creative freedom, not unlike a gifted musician who must make interpretive decisions concerning the score being played. Their talent is used to further the original design language, as we'll see in a few minutes. There is a way we can see what happens in the factory as the genuine laying on of hands from one generation to another, and the succession of craftsmen from Charles Peterson down to the present craftsmen and managers at Dean's Grange. To be sure, there was an apostolic succession of artisan-crafted pipes, which was broken when Paddy Larrigan retired in the mid-1990s. Paddy and his contemporary Frank Brady and men before them, all skilled in repairs, had learned from those who came before them, all the way back to Charles Peterson, who was himself, remember, apprenticed by Frederick Kapp, who carved meerschaums in London's Soho before taking his business to Dublin in 1874. Happily, that situation is reversing itself with Giacomo Pinzo, KMP's pipe specialist, and senior craftsman Austin Quinlan, who are artisan makers in their own right. David Blake, retired silversmith, once told me that there's enough idiosyncrasies in turning silver and gold mounts that he believes he could identify which silversmith had made a band or ferrule for the entirety of the 20th century. And that comment made me wonder if we might not trace the succession of silversmiths back to 1890. Jason Hinch is Peterson's current silversmith, and he was apprenticed by David Blake, taking over from David in mid-2014. David was trained by Liam Larrigan, Paddy Larrigan's brother, and took over from Liam in the mid-1980s. I believe Liam was apprenticed by Paddy Peacock, who had worked in mounting since he began service in 1934. I haven't been able to determine who the silversmith is holding the long roll of sterling in the center of this photograph from the catalog, but he may have been the first to do so. There was probably at least one silversmith between he and Peacock, but at most we're dealing with 6 or 7 men from 1890 to the present. The great depth psychologist Carl Jung, a Peterson system smoker, used the term collective unconscious to refer to ancestral memory and experience, one common to all. I want to borrow his notion of the collective unconscious and press it into whimsical service. I can do this because first, as Jung smoked a Peterson system pipe, I know he wouldn't have minded. Second, seen in a squinty sort of way, his concept captures how the 1906 catalog passed into the ancestral memory of the company. For our purpose, we need only a brief definition. The unconscious mind, says Jung, contains things shared between members of the same species. On the one side, the folk who make Peterson pipes, and on the other, those who smoke them. That pipe mind contains instincts, namely to make Peterson pipes and smoke them. Now, these instincts become archetypes, or universal symbols. Jung, smoking Granger, his favorite tobacco, says there's quite a few of these. For those there at the Chicago Pipe Show, and perhaps you who are listening, you might think these will include the wise old man, all of you as pipe smokers, the great mother, the women in our lives who allow us to buy pipes and tobaccos, and the tree of life, Erica arborea, the white heath, or briar. The collective unconscious, Jung believes, has a huge impact on everyone's life. We see that quite plainly around us when we're at pipe shows, but let's be specific about the particular archetype engendered in our collective unconscious by the 1906 catalog, and look how it has shaped those who make peats and those who smoke them. As a Dubliner from 1890 to 1967, when free secondary schooling was established in Ireland, most young people left school at the age of 14 to get a job. When we look at the pages of K&P's register, we see a number of entries where a young man at 14 entered service and at 64 received his gold watch for 50 years' service. This was accomplished because the lad needed a job, because Kapp's was a good place to work, and because Harry Kapp and his wife felt a responsibility for their young people, seeing that they were properly looked after by older craftsmen and women who stood in loco parentis. Whatever the eventual job, most 14-year-olds began as errand boys on the top floor to one of the secretaries before moving out into the factory for their apprenticeships in the world of pipes and tobacco. The aroma of tobacco from the blending room hit them when they entered the service entrance on Cuff Lane. They could hear the roar of the gasoline engine powering the machinery from the back of the ground floor. Sometimes they had witnessed spontaneous outbursts of groups singing along the mezzanines before the advent of portable radios. On an upper floor, they could see the silver and nickel smiths cutting and soldering bands, and as they traveled through the factory running errands, they could watch the stem benders, bowl cutters, case makers, pumicers, and finishers at their craft, calling out to one another, "Have you got a gross?" as production was tallied into units of 12/12s. They'd sometimes smell the odor of vulcanite, an odor so potent it gave rise to a perennial jest that one reason so many unmarried people worked at Kapp's was vulcanite's disease. Whether highly skilled or engaged in simpler and more repetitive tasks, the women and men the boys saw did what they did and made what they made as incarnate, human expressions of the archetypal Peterson pipes laid out in the 1906 catalog. By anamnesis, I'm talking about remembering, this word being used as the doctors and pastors among us know to indicate the process of calling to mind something important from the past. As a company, K&P's historical memory has sometimes been mistaken, but its heart memory almost never is. And I'm not being sentimental here, as the cardiologists and depth psychologists can tell you. When I was talking to Josh Burgess about this presentation, he told me one of his favorite quotes is by Samuel Johnson, who said, "Men need to be reminded more than instructed." Remembering the past isn't something most people do very much, unless they've experienced trauma or are in the second half of life. So it's interesting to me that it wasn't until Harry Kapp retired in 1972 and his team began to think about the centenary of the company that they first really stopped to take stock of its achievement. 1975 was seen as their 100th anniversary, since that was the year Charles Peterson came to work for Frederick Kapp. The year Harry left, in fact, the company seems to have begun thinking about its identity. And one of the first things they released as a result was an elongated, tapered stem, which I call the pachyderm, but in the 1906 catalog is simply called the long. These elephantine and beautiful stems were beautiful testaments to the patent era and part of the first wave of the company's Anamnesis. The patent era and catalog were obviously on everyone's minds, as you can see here in a rare trade show photo of Jimmy Nicholson, managing director at the time, with all the great sepia poster reprints the company did, and which Pete geeks in the United States in the 1980s and 90s valued exceedingly when they could find them. We know Jimmy Nicholson and Tony Dempsey had soaked themselves in the design language of the catalog, referring to it frequently. This photo from a 1980 Smoke Shop magazine article kind of sums it all up. You can see there the big 9.5 by 13 catalog that we just reprinted for the Chicago show. For the 1975 centenary, the company released a spate of high-end limited numbered editions for the first time, mostly of their system shapes, which featured special condensers, pipe boxes, signed certificates, and leather gloves. But it wasn't until the 1979 catalog that we see the first specific homage to the 1906 catalog in the Cap and Chain limited edition 9 and 20 deluxe systems, the Spigots, and the specialty 04 Kaffir. These would be followed in 1981 by the landmark Mark Twain, modeled after Twain's own patent 14B. As if all this adulation weren't enough, it goes even deeper, right into the standard shape chart. We've already seen the decade-long revival of the pachyderm stems. If you have the reproduction of the 1896 catalog or can get a copy of my 1906 reprint, you'll remember Captain Peterson designed 3 system shape groups: the billiard, the Dutch, and the ball. Aside from the tiny 317, the ball shape had disappeared from the system group. But right here in the late Republic, around 1978 or so, guess what emerges? A new ball system shape in 2 sizes, the 02 and its smaller system sibling, the 03. About 15 years later, after the success of the first Sherlock Holmes set, Tom Palmer, Mario Lubinski, and Tony Whelan Sr. were having drinks one evening, brainstorming 7 new shapes for a return of Sherlock Holmes set. Lubinski, KMP's Italian distributor since the early 1970s, had become a sort of 5th Beatle on Peterson's design team, if you remember the huge significance George Martin had on the records of the Fab Four. And Mario sketched on a cocktail napkin his inspired hybrid of the ball and the umpal, which became the Lestrade shape as part of the second wave of Anamnesis in the company's history. But I'm getting ahead of my story. Here's a 1986 photo Mario Lubinski sent me that's another icon of the depth of Peterson's heart memory. On the left, you'll see the 1901 Sun 2 standard typewriter, which appeared just 4 years after K&P began using a typewriter in their workplace. On the right is Mario's own copy of the 1906 catalog, and in between are the amazing full-size patent amber P-lip and nap stems that Mario had Patty Larrigan make up, replete with Patty's own Briar Circle inserts. Patty told me it was Mario digging around in old boxes who discovered these stems and wanted them made up for his legion of Pete geeks in Italy. Moving back a decade, remember there were 4 new system shapes, all inspired by the 1906 catalog. The 02 and 03 already mentioned, but also 2 more, the 01 Short Dutch and the 05 Bent Dublin. The 01301 short Dutch was another patent-inspired system shape. An outsider might see it and say, oh, just another bent pot. As a Peterson historian, however, I don't think that's correct. Someone in the factory, someone marinated in the company's bent Dutch shape group, which had been around since 1896, might say, well, now you see, we've only got the Dutch 4 and the Dutch 8 right now, so why don't we go back and use that number 1 the way it was used in the beginning for a Dutch billiard. Only this time we'll make it a wee bit shorter and a wee bit wider. While Paddy Larrigan is now remembered for his calabash version of the shape 5, which would become the Sherlock Holmes original in 1987, his first vision was to take the patent-era Dublin shape and turn it into a system, a bent system, and see how closely it parallels the patent 120, seen here in its long version, and how it's got that original flared, slightly canted Dublin bowl, and not the upright, stolid 1950s affair that's been with us for the past 70 years. The bent Dublin system was only around from about 1978 to 1984, which is too bad, as it's the only system to incorporate Ireland's iconic pipe shape, the Dublin or Dudeen, and it's a great smoking instrument as well. The Dublin era witnessed the second wave in the company's Anamnesis. It was complicated by the fact that when Tom Palmer bought the company, he really had no idea what it was. He was in love, however, with its heritage and history, and yet he wasn't actually a pipe smoker, and neither was his son Connor, who took the reins as commercial director in 2015. Yet, through serendipity, grace, and goodwill, Palmer had Paddy Larrigan for a few years and was inspired by the research of a local Latvian journal, Sandra Bondarevska, and met the goddaughters of Charles Peterson's daughter Isolde, who bequeathed some of Charles Peterson's pipes to the company. From 1995 to 2013, K&P would release 4 separate antique collections, each one drawing on the 1906 catalog, and each taking as its inspiration the shapes it contained. In addition to these, Dublin-era Peterson would release 2 more tributes to the catalog, an homage to Captain Peterson's own 01A, given to him by the goddaughters of Isolde Peterson, and the large Jap, released as the 2017 Pipe of the Year. The third great wave of Anamnesis arrived with the Laudisi era, announced in July 2018. With an academic background in history himself, CEO Sykes Wilford immediately made clear his commitment to honoring the company's past and reissuing some of its amazing great achievements. In earlier slides, we've already seen that Laudisi Peterson had paid close attention to the patent era and its catalog. The genius of the Laudisi era, however, is that their collaborative team has endeavored to incorporate the strengths of every era of Peterson's design history. They've upgraded the Dublin era's Christmas, Halloween, and St. Patrick's Day commemorative releases, and they've added the Carol of Carrollton. They've issued pipes from the Irish Free State and Ire eras. They've reinstated the Supreme Tier from the early Republic. They've not only returned to hand shank stamping, but revived the COM, or Country of Manufacture stamp, with the Made in Ireland in an oval. And just this year, in 2025, they've added a year date, making every single pipe datable from now on. While some will be content to look at the impact of the catalog purely from the standpoint of materialist and commercialist attitudes, that's not the way Captain Peterson understood what he was doing, nor does it account for the company's abiding success. No Wunderkind, his was a slow, steady growth, but by 1905 the twin strands of his mission statement were in place, with which I'll conclude this presentation. The first has to do with his idea, and the second with his icon. Charles wasn't an entrepreneur like Alfred Dunhill. Charles Peterson was instead a Latvian farmer's son who lived in a village 25 miles from the nearest big town, who decided to become a wood turner at 15 and apprenticed himself in a classic German 5-year program. He got his certificate in 1872, spent his journeyman year in Hamburg, and then got his first job with Frederick Kapp in Dublin. What this means for the company is that he had a unique understanding of the people who worked for Kapp's. He knew what it was like to toil at a craft, to sit with Nellie, to acquire a trade, and then to see in it something more. What happened in the factory was an extension of his identity, which he embraced 100%. Even after becoming managing director, the smock he wore in photographs wasn't ornamental. He was still actively carving briars and meerschaums and turning his mind to new patents right up to the end of his life. The first strand of the mission statement, Captain Peterson's idea, you've doubtless memorized from the number of times I've talked or written about it. It's found in the statement at the beginning of both catalogs. When we think how universally the pipe has affected modern thought in art, science, literature, politics, and even the pulpit, how it has contributed to the best wit of our time, how it has given relief and solace to overworked brains, how it has drawn men together everywhere in many a jovial social smoke, and added comfort to countless chimney corners, the importance of supplying as perfect a pipe as possible is at once recognized. As those whose work is in advertising and data analysis may roll their eyes at this, it's worth a few minutes to see if these words are mere snake oil or if there's something else at work here. In Truth and Method, philosopher Hans-Georg Gadamer offers two paths to understanding the mission statement, either through a hermeneutic of suspicion or a hermeneutic of trust. If through a hermeneutic of suspicion, we're right interpreting Captain Peterson's words as puffery, a legal term indicating K&P was simply laying on the shinola to sell pipes. Such a play on sentiment fools no one, but like the commercialism behind Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, makes us feel better about parting with our money. If we interpret the words through a hermeneutic of trust, then we must look to see if there's an essential truthfulness in the statement. Gadamer would say that whether we read the statement with the enlightened cynicism of appetite and competition, that is, a hermeneutic of suspicion, or the countercultural determination to believe it might be true, that is, with a hermeneutic of trust, it has to be put to the test. We can do that with the aid of the tools of contextual criticism. This analyzes a cultural product like the catalog and mission statement in this instance by examining its relationship to the social, political, and historical context in which it was created and received. In other words, how does the statement line up with what we know of Charles Peterson and his character as an artisan, a businessman, and a private human being? Portraits of Captain Peterson after the age of 20 all possess the same small sparkling eyes, the light smile and ready intelligence. This one was taken in the mid-1880s when he was in his 30s, happily married to Sarah and working on his first patent. We've recovered quite a bit of Charles Peterson's biography. He was someone who approached genius and had a generous, sanguine, humorous temperament. He was an enormously gifted craftsman and entrepreneur. He worked methodically for decades on his craft and his several patent designs. He was fluent in Latvian, Russian, German, and English. The captain was devoted to his first wife, Sarah Kapp, who helped him transform a Dublin tobacconist into a highly successful world export business. After mourning her premature death for a decade, he remarried. He had an amazing second marriage with Annie O'Regan. He became a devoted father, as numerous postcards to his little girl Soldi attest. Religiously, he was a peculiar type of freethinker, not hostile as that German movement typically was to the beliefs of others, but accommodating. Politically, like his brother John and cousin Conrad, he leaned to the socialist end of the contemporary political spectrum, but he lacked their extremism. He put his beliefs into practice by taking less rather than more by way of salary as managing director of his company. He offered equitable wages to the women and men in KMP's employ, and he honored the religious holidays of the practicing Jews who worked for them. The captain and his nephew Alfred Kapp sent pipes to London's poor sandwich men at the Christmas of 1898, 1899, and 1900. He and Alfred sent 25,000 pipes to Irish troops at the front in 1914. While he was careful not to wreck his business in the political turmoils of Ireland, he also quietly supported Home Rule. His wife Annie would be far more demonstrative in her participation of that movement, and his daughter Soldi would meld their belief in human rights in the important role she played in later life as one of the earliest members of Ireland's Amnesty International. The second strand of DNA in Kapp and Peterson's mission statement is seen in the frontispiece to the 1906 catalog, the icon of the thinking man. I'm sure this engraving has drawn legions of smokers to the system pipe since its appearance over 135 years ago, myself among them, as it appeared in newspaper ads, on pipe boxes, brochures, and countless catalogs. It's an icon for what many pipemen see as an implied or explicit part of their identity, whether as intellectuals, father figures, wise men, artists, or mystics. It was and is absolutely directed at anyone wanting to make this identification. Certainly the requirements and care of the system pipe call for this type of smoker, as even a brief roll call of those known to have smoked it indicate. Mark Twain, Albert Einstein, Carl Jung, Jacques Cousteau, Paul McCartney, Karl Barth, Richard Leakey, Robert Donat, and many others. But where did the icon come from? For over 120 years, many smokers have thought it was a representation of Captain Peterson himself, a reasonable assumption. The story handed down at the factory when I interviewed retired veterans Dermot Ward and Harry Phelan was that it represented a famous professor at Trinity College, but who they couldn't say. Fortunately, Scott Forrest, one of the peat geeks at the Peterson Pipe Notes community, decided to find out, and it's to Scott we're indebted for now knowing how deep the root of the thinking man goes. The historical person behind the icon was Sir Samuel Ferguson. Born in Belfast, he studied law at Trinity College in Dublin, where he set up practice and lived afterwards. He would marry Mary Guinness, an intellectual and author from one of Dublin's great dynasties. Ferguson was the epitome of the thinking man. His interest in nature and antiquities led to the publication of his work on the Ogham stones, sometimes called Celtic tree alphabets, which can be seen dotting the Irish countryside and are something Tolkien doubtless absorbed in creating his mythology. Ferguson was among the foremost Irish poets of the 19th century and is acclaimed as the direct forebear of W.B. Yeats. His poetry combines a love of Irish mythology, antiquities, and nature, again reminding us of Tolkien's Legendarium. Much more could be said of him, including a knighthood in 1878, a book on St. Patrick, translating early documents and including his own verse, and his activities with the Royal Irish Academy. For us, however silly it seems, we have to ask, did Ferguson smoke a Peterson patent pipe? As far as I can tell, no. Yet Charles Peterson and Alfred Kapp couldn't help but know of Ferguson and had seen or read his books, perhaps even attended one of his lectures. Captain Peterson may even have known Ferguson personally, although he died in 1887, 3 years before the first patent. What is certainly true is that someone at KMP saw the photogravure in the front of Lady Mary's biography and said, "There, That's the thinking man. And so he was. To conclude, putting together Captain Peterson's personal and business life, as these eventuated in the historic 1906 catalog, we find a mission which has laid a strong foundation for a company celebrating its 160th anniversary this year. Equally important, that mission has connected Kapp and Peterson with its customers in a way that goes far deeper than nicotine addiction or animal gourmandism, to an unspoken bedrock that as pipe smokers we used to know but seem to have forgotten. The unexamined life is not worth living, as Socrates, one of the first and greatest thinking men, said. Alongside our loud culture of consumption, there's also a quieter one of stewardship and generosity that Charles Peterson seems to endorse. For him, tobacco was a comfort and pipes a joy. They can serve to ease life's difficulties, smoothing out the rough places and helping us celebrate the smooth.